Guys, welcome back to the Drone Camps channel. Today we're going to do a brand new Betaflight setup video for the FPV community, and we're going to walk you through the steps that you need to do to set up your bind and fly with your TBS Crossfire receiver or ELRS receiver, as well as your goggles. So today we're going to use the Moz 7. This is a brand new drone from Geprc, and it is a long-range drone, so we're also going to show you some GPS setup in this video as well for a little bit further update to our classic Betaflight setup video. So let's go ahead and get started. The first few things that you're going to need to do this are your FPV goggles. You're going to need a wrench to remove your propellers, super important. You're also going to need your flight battery, whichever one you're using, and you're going to need your radio and your drone, as well as a USB-C cable or Android style cable, a classic USB, depending on which version of the connector you have on your flight controller. It also needs to be a data cable, so very important there that it is a data cable so we can pass through to Betaflight. Now go ahead and go online to the GitHub repository and download the latest version of Betaflight so you don't have any issues with updating the firmware. If you're using a much older version, it might kind of screw up the current firmware on your quad if you use too old of a version to what versions on your quad. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and take my data cable now, and I'm going to plug it into the quad, so you can do the same at home. We're going to plug this in. You should see a light up on your flight controller. You should see an LED light there. Now you should automatically connect to Betaflight. If you don't, go ahead and select the USB port on the top right hand tab over on the right hand side of the screen. Once you're inside, you're going to be in the setup menu. So this is the first menu that you're going to go to. And the first thing we're going to do is make sure the quad's sitting nice and level on the bench, and go ahead and click Calibrate Accelerometer. And that's going to just make sure that everything is level. When you fly in stability mode, your flight controller will do the perfect job for flying in stability mode. So if it's a little bit off, leaning one way to the other, you definitely need to calibrate that. Now the next thing we're going to do is make sure the quad's facing you, rear facing you, flat on the desk, and go ahead and click on the right hand side of the screen, reset Z axis. And that's going to bring everything back to you as normal. Go ahead and pick up your quad, rotate it forward, rotate it backwards, rotate it left, and rotate it right. That way we know that all of the axes are correct to the flight controller orientation on your quad. So very important that you do that. Now we can go down to the next tab, and we're just going to go in sync here down through the tabs, and I'm going to show you what needs to be checked off. If you are using TBS Crossfire or ELRS, whatever UART that your receiver is hooked up to, TX and RX, both of those receivers have 4 wires coming off of them. Sometimes if TX and RX are switched, you don't see them loading up in the receiver tab for your radio, like your sticks aren't working in the receiver tab. That means you need to switch TX and RX wires once again with your soldering iron, and then everything should just magically start working. But before you do that, in the ports tab, you have to make sure that you have serial RX selected and checked right here on the screen. If that's checked, that UART will become active on serial RX, and then your receiver will start working. So very important that you do that. Now, secondly, I've heard a lot of people recently ask me, my DJI goggles OSD is not working. You may have bound your goggles up to your 04, but you don't see any OSD. The way to get that working, very simple. Go to the UART that it's on. It's usually soldered or plugged into the flight controller on UART 1 on most bind and fly quads. So we're going to go ahead and make sure that UART 1 is checked on the MSP tab, not the serial RX tab over, okay? Serial RX is reserved for other peripherals and receivers. So we'll go ahead and select UART 1 there. We know that's correct. Now go all the way over to the right-hand side where it says peripherals, and you want to select VTX MSP plus display port. That will enable the OSD on your DJI goggles. Very important that you do that. You don't have to have VTX MSP enabled to see OSD on analog style quads. We'll get to that when we get to the OSD screen at the bottom left hand side of the Betaflight tabs. So the next thing we have is UART 3, and that is checked on, and we're going to go down all the way to UART 6, and depending on where your GPS is soldered up to, which UART, that will determine where you're going to enable sensor input for GPS. So go ahead and select GPS. If it's the MOS 7 V1 or the V2, it should be on UART 6 down there. Make sure GPS is selected. And now when you load up a battery, when you plug in the battery, you go outside, make sure you're outside when you're setting up your GPS, and you should see some packets being received in the GPS tab. And we'll get to that in a minute. But now that we're finished with all of our different ports, let's go ahead and save and reboot. You want to do that real quickly. And now we're going to go back into Betaflight, and we're going to go down to the configuration tab. We're just going to breeze through this real quick. And it really depends on what type of flight controller you have, whether you have barometer on there or magnometer. Most people are not running magnometers. Make sure that accelerometer is checked on. If accelerometer is checked off, when you go to the setup page to calibrate the accelerometer at the very top of the screen like we did before, it won't be available unless accelerometer is checked on here in the system configuration tab right here. So make sure that that is set. We have PID loop frequency at 8 kilohertz. That's totally fine. Accelerometer trim, we don't have any of that. Board and sensor alignment, everything on this one seems to be 0 degrees across the board. And we're going to scroll down to personalization. This is where you can change your craft name and your pilot name, and you can activate both of those in the OSD menu coming up. RX lost and set, and what this is over here in the D-Shot beacon configuration is basically an electronic beeper that allows your ESCs to beep on a switch on your radio. Pretty nice to have that on, and that will also beep with a physical switch. Should you activate both, you'll have a physical beeper and electronic beeper. And for those that don't have a physical beeper, this is kind of a nice option, great for tiny whoops and things like that. So camera angle on this one, we're going to leave that set to 0. The arm angle, we're going to set to 180, because if you ever crash into a tree and you just kind of momentarily need to arm to try to get yourself out, some people like to do that, some people don't. It will also allow you to do turtle mode as well, but we're not going to do turtle mode on a 7-inch. Most importantly, beeper configuration, everything down here can kind of stay on and checked as stock in Betaflight. That's totally fine. Other features, air mode, definitely want that on. GPS, you want that on if you're running GPS. You can turn it off if you don't have it. OSD, very important, we have that one checked. LED strip, if you have LEDs, yes. Soft serial, we don't need that right now. And so since we made a few changes here, we're going to go ahead and save and reboot again. Go out of Betaflight. It's going to restart the flight controller and come back into Betaflight. Now we're going to go down to power and battery. And this is where you can change your ESC voltage meter source. So right now we have it onboard ADC. That's super important to have that so that you have the correct displayed cell voltage on the screen on your OSD. Hopefully you're still with me. And now at this point, if we want to, what we can do is we can grab the battery that we're most likely going to use. So this one right here is a 6S 6000 milliamp. Yours might be different, but go ahead and unplug your USB. Again, make sure that your props are off. We're going to turn on the radio, and I'm assuming that you've bound up your receiver at this point. Go ahead and plug in the quad. Now we're connected to the radio, and you'll hear a series of beeps, and it may be trying to make a GPS location lock, but we're not too worried about that right now because we are indoors. If you're trying to set up GPS again, remember take it outside. Some people are telling me that they can't set it up because they're indoors and they can't get a lock. Very interesting. So right here we can see that up at the top of the screen it says 6S, and I'm at 23 volts. So look at the very top of the screen, and that's what it's showing right there. We have a voltage meter right there. The battery says 23.1. Now if you look in your goggles menus and you see that it looks different than what's inside Betaflight, there goes the GPS lock. I'm indoors and it's made a GPS lock. It's pretty awesome. So if you see that up at the top of the screen is different, where it says 23.08 volts, 9 volts, if it's different inside Betaflight than the OSD on your goggles, you can adjust that according to what you see actually on your drone. So take a voltage meter, measure it on the battery, and a voltage meter is something that all you guys should have. Measure that, see what the voltage meter is reading, and then match it up inside Betaflight in the voltage meter tab by changing these values up and down a few notches at a time. And once you get to the correct voltage, you'll have it calibrated to your particular battery. Very important to do that. Now, battery at the bottom, amperage meter, we're not going to change that. That's 100. and 0, that's totally fine. It does see it's 6 cells. I don't have to calibrate any of my voltage meter readings right there because mine is correct. Now we're going to go ahead and save, but if we were going to calibrate, we could click the calibration button next to save. If we click that, it will say to calibrate, use a multimeter like we just told you and measure the current. And I'm going to go ahead and calibrate just for funsies. And now you should be calibrated. And again, depending on what size, what your battery is saying versus from the voltage reader to Betaflight. Want that to match up. Very important so that you have the correct battery voltage displayed on the screen. So now we're going to go down to Betaflight fail-safe setup. And this is where if you don't have GPS, go ahead and click drop and save and reboot right here, because you want the signal to drop the quad to the ground should you lose signal. That way you don't lose your drone or it doesn't fly away at the last known throttle input command. For us, we're going to go ahead and we're going to click GPS rescue. You want to make sure that's turned on if you're running GPS. Now we're going to scroll down to the very bottom, and if arming without fix is checked, make sure you uncheck that option, because you really need to make a fix home point lock before you take off. And your quad will make a series of beeps when it does make a lock, and then will allow you to arm the quad. Otherwise, until it makes a home lock and GPS home point, it will not let you take off, which is very important for GPS return to home to properly work on your quad. Otherwise, it's going to default and drop to the ground. So we're going to go ahead and save and reboot. You're going to hear a series of beeps. We're going to come back into Betaflight now. We're going to go down to presets, and for your presets, depending on which type of goggles you're using, if you're using like the Goggles 2, you might want to use the OSD WTF for the O3 and the Avatar HDs if you're trying to work with getting your OSD to show up on previous goggles, not specifically the DJI 04 and the Goggles 3. So we're going to bypass that since I have the Goggles 3 here. We're going to go to PID tuning. This is an art all itself, and if you haven't done this yet, this will take some practice and some time at the field, taking off, adjusting a few parameters, trying to get that jello out of your flight controller versus your goggles. So if you see kind of wavy video in your goggles, that means that your quad needs to be PID tuned. So you can look for those PID tunes for different quads on the internet. Some people give them to you for free, as well as we do that ourselves. Now you're going to go down to the receiver tab, and this is important because, hey, this all needs to work properly before you fly your quad. So go ahead and scroll down a little bit. If you see all of these bars lining up themselves, they're not pushed back like these section are right here. And when you move your stick, you should see that things are moving in here. If they're not moving, that means that your quad's not properly bound up to your transmitter. And you also may need to plug in a battery. Sometimes it works to power the receiver with the radio and just using the cable and not having to use the battery. And sometimes you have to have the battery plugged in for the receiver to show up inside Betaflight. So that happens a lot on some of the smaller whoops. They will show you once you plug in the cable, 5 volts, plenty enough. It will go ahead and show you that. But this case, it wouldn't show me anything when I had the battery unplugged. So very important that you know that. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to test channel direction now. I'm going to use the right stick. I'm going to push it to the right. You should see the top red bar go to the right. When I push it left, it should go left. When I push pitch up on the right stick again, pushing up on the right stick, you should see pitch go up. Now when I press down with pitch, it should go down, meaning to the left, and pushing up should make it go to the right. Now yaw, pushing left should go left, right should go right. That all looks good. It's coming in and landing in back around 1500, up just past 2000. Now we're going to go to throttle, up, down. That's on the left-hand side for me. Auxiliary 1 is where my first mode is set up, which is arming the quad. So when I press this flat button right here on the boxer, this is my arm switch. The next one down, and you'll see these aux move. And now that's my mode switch. I have a 3-position mode switch. I have stability, horizon, and we have full-on manual / acro mode. And the other ones there is the beeper, which is both the physical and the electronic beeper. And finally, on auxiliary 4, we have GPS return to home. And usually what I'll do is I'll take a colored piece of silicone tubing, and I'll cut a piece and put it over top of where my GPS return to home is. That just gives me a visual. If I'm in a panic and I need to hit return to home, I know where that button is. It's always on the outside over here. Very important for you to be able to get to that quickly and not kind of search for that. So in case of emergency, that's great to have that. So go ahead and set save. If you are trying to bind up an ELRS receiver inside this tab, you can also do that by clicking bind receiver. It will put your receiver into bind mode, and then you can go into the system panel in the ELRS configurator and select bind there. Now we're going to go down to modes, and modes, very simple. And what some of you guys might not know is that manual mode, otherwise known as acro mode, does not have its own tab here to create inside the modes menu. Very confusing for some of you new guys. So what I usually do first, when I go to take off on my quad, you see this second one down here is angle, and that is what we call stability mode. I have this little slider bar here that I can grab in the middle and slide and drag around. You want these two tabs to be where that gold bar right there is kind of centered up, and go ahead and press save there. And when I move my auxiliary 2 switch, we're going to go ahead and let's save it again. When I move that, you should see that gold bar move back and forth. So right now I'm floating in midair. You can kind of see that there's no bar selected there. It's not in any gold bar here. That means that I'm in full acro mode. So right now I don't have horizon there, but if I wanted to add horizon, just go ahead and add a range. Click on add range. We're going to select aux2 to make sure it's on the same switch. That would be position 2 on the switch aux2. So now I slid those sliders in, and it won't show me anything working properly yet. Horizon doesn't highlight. It should highlight. So go ahead and press save. Now when I go down to position 2, watch what happens on the screen. When I go to horizon, horizon lights up, yeah? So if it doesn't, that means that it's not saved back to your flight controller. So make sure it highlights, go back to angle, and you won't see a highlight on angle mode for some unknown reason. But the third position switch down, floating all the way in the air on the end in the gray zone with no gold bar, that's gonna be pure acro mode. So now we're going to go scroll down to GPS rescue. I am on aux4, so remember it's that stick that's all the way out to the edge of this transmitter. Flip all the way out, and this is just a 2-position switch. I like my return to home on a 2-position switch there. Switching it down puts me in GPS rescue and back up. Always have all your switches up when you start your transmitter, and this is how we're going to set this transmitter up to be safe. Beeper's on aux3, so that is my little blue labeled switch here. And both of those are beeping when I go all the way down. Save. And now the rest of this is just grayed out. We're not using any other modes here. So we're set on our modes. So now you should have flight modes, an arm switch, and you can also do pre-arm if you want to have a two-stage arming switch to add a little bit more safety to your setup so you don't accidentally arm and have it fly up and hit you. A lot of people use pre-arm these days, so that is located a little further down right here. So you want to add a pre-arm range to your arm switch, you can definitely do that too as well. So that would be a two switch configuration there. So a little more complicated, but it's going to probably save you from hurting yourself. So we're going to go down to GPS now, and we can see that we are getting packets. We got plenty of packets here, and that is awesome. So if you don't see these green bars right here happening in your GPS mode, that's gonna be a sign that you don't have it hooked up properly. You may have to go switch the TX and RX wires on the flight controller if you did your own build. If you got a bind and fly that had GPS on there already, it's probably already set up and you're seeing packets. And that just means the signal strength bars right there that will show you that you have some green happening there. So U-blocks is kind of the most standard GPS protocol out there. There's also NMEA and MSP there. We're going to set auto config Galileo and set home point once. Very good. So auto detect there, ground system types, and we are pretty much good to go there. We have 19 satellites. That's pretty good inside the studio. Not bad. Now you can go ahead and save and reboot that, and now your GPS should be working fully working. So we're going to scroll down to motors now, and this is one of the most important tabs inside Betaflight in 2025. Make sure that your configuration, your motor direction is set up perfectly to the way you put your props on your quad. So this one happens to be what I call right turn rear. So if we look at motor number 1, it is rotating to the right. Diagonally right across from that, you will have also another right turning motor. Motor number 4 is right turn. And then the 2 and 3 motors will be rotating on the left hand turn there. So, and that is the standard quad configuration. Now, if you have the other way around with props out, what they call props out in the front of the quad, that will be motor direction reverse. So if this tab is checked on, that means you have right turn left instead of rear. So right turn number 1 motor will be turning to the left if quad direction is reversed. And again, that's a props out configuration, but we're going to leave ours on this standard motor direction right here. So we're going to go ahead down here. We don't have motor stop. Do not turn motor stop on, because that will not have you use air mode. Very important that you leave that the way it is right there. You don't want to not have air mode, because when you get to the bottom of your stick, you still want your motors to be moving and not come to a complete stop. That's what that's going to do if you have that checked. So turn off motor stop, and everything else in here looks good. So we're going to go ahead back out to OSD. Now OSD can be configured several different ways here. If we're using analog, we're going to have it set to NTSC or auto for the video format. If you have HD goggles like the Goggles 3 and the Goggles 2, make sure that HD is selected. And by all means, make sure you have the latest firmware for 03 and 04 type of VTXs. Very important if you're doing that. So, because the older versions of firmware don't work with the 04s. And sometimes not the 03s, really old versions. So everything in here is completely up to you. You can grab things in the middle of the screen and drag them and drag and drop things around the screen. Now, if you go ahead and turn on your goggles as well, when you make a change on the screen here, you'll see it once you save inside Betaflight. If you make a change, if you drag something down and you make a change and you save it, hear the quad restart. Once it reloads, you'll see it in your goggles when your goggles are turned on. So very important that you can make live real-time changes. Now again, if you're on analog goggles, put it on auto or NTSC. I have mine set to metric for all of my on-screen display. And over here on the left-hand side, you can go crazy and add all kinds of information on the screen. I usually like to have my 2 versions of battery voltage, which is the main battery voltage and then the per cell. If I'm flying long range, absolutely 100% I want to see my per cell voltage, because if I'm flying a Lion pack like this one, that means I can go down to about 3 volt per cell. If it drops anything below 3 volt per cell, I want to be back at the home point. People do say you can fly it down to 2.6, but then the battery starts to get really hot. Don't try to do that with a LiPo. The nominal voltage on LiPo around 3.2 to 3.5 volt. If you get lower than 3.2 on a LiPo, you're really going to start to damage things and it'll start to swell. So look out for that. Very important. Now we'll go back up here and everything looks good here in the OSD. Again, you can change a few of those things there. Everything looks good for me. I'm not going to add anything else. One last thing is that I do like to have my countdown or my fly time timer, and that one's timer 2. Timer 1 is from the time you turn the quad on, and that doesn't give me a proper knowledge of how long my flight is, because that also includes the time it's sitting on the ground and just having the battery plugged in. So timer 1, I never use that one. Always use timer 2. Now let's go ahead and click save again. And we're going to move down to video transmitter. Everything is looking good there. We're not going to play around with any of that. Sensors are all good. My tethered logging is good. Black box, you can turn this on and off to save to, depending on what type of black box data recorder you have, whether it's onboard storage or SD card. And in this case, it is set to SD card. That's completely fine. And we can go to CLI. Now, CLI is where a lot of magic can happen. You can make a lot of changes and parameters to your GPS, your flight controller, ESCs, just about anything you want to change inside CLI. If you're comfortable with programming language, you can really go deep in Betaflight here. Now, if you want some basic commands, very simple. Let's go ahead and type, you can type version to start. Version is very important for you. When you first get a brand new quad, you want to see what version of Betaflight's on there. Just type in version, hit return, and then it's going to show you what's on there currently. Betaflight STM32 We have Betaflight 4.1.5 from January 10th, 2025 on the Mod 7 V2. So that's what's on there, and it shows you the board as well. It's the Taker H743 on board. And again, you can update that should, say, Geprc come out with a new firmware. You can update it, but make sure that you save your settings to your desktop. And I'm going to show you how to do that now. So after we've made all these changes, super important to do this. Type in DUMP. We're going to do a dump. And now it's going to give us all the data that we just put into that flight controller and all the changes that we just made on the screen. You can scroll back up and look at things individually. If you want to save to a file, which I always recommend for every single quad that you own, click Save to File. We're going to go ahead and save that to the desktop. Once you save it down to the desktop, now you have a backup. You can copy and paste that back in the CLI later. Say you updated it to a new version of the firmware and you lost all your settings and went back to 0. You have to reset the whole thing or watch this video again. And you now have a backup of your Betaflight settings. Very important there. So now that we're all done with that, we can go back to the main setup and enjoy that we are now set up and ready for a test flight. A couple more hints for your first flight. If you have a brand new quad and you're going out to fly this for the very first time, I always recommend making sure, number one, that your props are on correctly. And once you do that, make sure that you're in a wide open area, no trees, things like that, no people, animals, cars, a highway too close, because if one propeller is wrong, it could fly off in, to the distance, and you're not sure what direction it's going to go when you have one propeller on wrong. So very important there that you have the propellers on correctly. Now also take off line of sight, no goggles, hover it above your landing pad, and that way you know that all of your orientations are right. Forward, back, left, and right with your transmitter, and your throttle is working properly, and your arm switch as well. And again, I always put stability on my quads so that when I come back in to land, I just flip it into stability. You don't have to worry about landing manually. And I do a nice gentle hover to a land on my landing pad. Same thing for takeoffs. I take off in stability, get a little ways up in the air, say 40, 50 feet, switch into acro, and I go off and fly and do my freestyle or my long range flight. But flying at line of sight first will really save you a lot of trouble, because if you goggle up and it has a propeller on wrong, it come back and hit you and you won't even see it coming at you. So very important to just see it first that it flies, and then go ahead, set it back down and land it, and then goggle up and fly FPV second after you know that everything is set up properly. And then you can go out and test your flight modes out in a big open field. And I always recommend taking the GPS way out, say 150 meters out, flipping into GPS return to home, and do what we call a field test. If you go down a long dirt road with not a lot of trees on the side of it, not a windy road, just a straight ahead long dirt road, that way if the GPS return doesn't work right, it'll just drop down on the road. And make sure you're not super high up when you hit GPS return to home. And you should have a great experience with that. And that way you'll be able to fly in the quad, and hopefully after this video, your return to home works properly. So thanks again for watching our updated version of Betaflight setup, as well as GPS, all of the sticks and channel functions inside the radio, your motors, OSD, all that good stuff right here on the Drone Camps channel. If you have any questions at all, please do put them in the comments down below. If this video helped you, please click the like button and subscribe to see more tutorials, reviews, and drone news right here on the Drone Camps channel, guys. I appreciate you. Thank you again for hanging out and setting up a quad with me. That was a lot of fun. Take care, you guys. I will see you on the next one.